Does gender matter? So, rereading an article that I've read a number of times, but read it with kind of a different perspective given what is happening in our world today. I'm going to start with a really long quote, and I'm going to repeat it a couple times so it sinks in a little bit because it took me a while. A system of oppression has been built upon observable differences between people, for example, skin color, race, gender, language, etc. The meaning behind these differences have been socially constructed and so can be reconstructed to represent different categories with different values associated with them. Okay, so it's a tough one, so let's go over it again. A system of oppression has been built upon observable differences between people. For example, skin color, race, gender, sexuality, ability, all these kinds of things, right? There's so many examples. The meaning behind these differences have been socially constructed and so can be reconstructed to represent different categories with different values associated with them. So Kapawi, that's a revolutionary sort of idea, right? I think it's really important. We've talked a lot about gender socialization in our class, which is socially constructed, created, and shaped by cultural values, perceptions, and practices. So, gender bias towards females is a system of oppression that has been built upon observable differences between people, right? So, in our class, we talk a lot about the impact of gender bias on females. But because our class also meets the criteria for race and ethnicity, we talk about other marginalized people outside of the dominant culture. And the dominant culture, at least for us, probably for everywhere, is male, white, heterosexual, Christian, temporarily able-bodied, youthful, and has access to wealth and resources. So, racial, ability, sexuality, biases are systems of oppression that have been built upon observable differences between people. And so can be reconstructed to represent different categories with different values associated with them. So that's fabulous, right? It means we can change. We can address gender bias. And yeah, fabulous again that we can change in terms of our racism, our ableism, our homophobia, our xenophobia, all of that. We can get outside of the dominant culture box and make some changes. I'm really interested in this part of the quote about oppression. A system of oppression has been built upon observable differences between people. And why is that so important right now? Why does that matter so much right now? While no virus intrinsically discriminates based on borders, citizenship status, skin color, or socioeconomic status, the inequities in our society means that COVID-19 is hitting the poor and socially marginalized hardest, both in our hospital and across the nation, hitting people outside of the dominant culture. And I'm not talking about the part where more males die from COVID-19. That's another discussion. So, because of years of discriminatory policy, racism, people of color tend to suffer from poverty, negative underlying health conditions, poor housing environments at a much higher rate than the dominant culture. These variables make the coronavirus pretty tough to fight. African American people are dying from COVID-19 at higher rates because racism is a pre-existing condition. The coronavirus pandemic is no great equalizer, says epidemiologist, I said it right, Kamara Jones. She relays that this disease is not an equal opportunity disease. Black people are contracting the coronavirus and dying from the disease at higher rates than other people. They're more likely to be uninsured. They're more likely to work at low-paying jobs. More likely to suffer. Not, as Jones takes pains to emphasize, because of biology. So in some areas of the United States, COVID-19 is killing Latinos, Latinas at up to 3 times the rate that is killing white people, and Latinx are among the least able to access care. Why is some of this happening? Because Latinos make up a large portion of what's now considered the essential workforce of grocery store staff, restaurant workers, caretakers, cleaners, delivery workers, and are putting themselves at the front lines of all of this. And for many Latinx, the economic fallout from the pandemic is just as bad as the health risks. So weighing the odds of what they should do, taking those chances. So compared to the overall US population, Latinx just disproportionately have taken a pay cut, lost a job, or both. American Indians have been hit hard by the coronavirus, and they're battling red tape to get help. So this is because there's been a long fight about the inadequate health care that American Indians have, their overcrowded housing conditions, and because of that, they're at a higher risk for the pandemic. The federal funding that they were supposed to get decades ago have just been put on hold with debates. And so again, increasing the odds of the spread of the virus within American Indian communities. Tinderbox, because of overcrowded housing, 16 times more than the national, 16 times more than the national average in terms of their housing conditions. We are killing them, the heavy toll COVID-19 takes on undocumented immigrants. Detained immigrants are vulnerable to the transmission of COVID-19 due to inadequate health care and extreme overcrowding. We've seen that in some of our border stories in terms of the overcrowding of jailed immigrants, right? And then the millions of undocumented workers that continue to work during this pandemic and again are at the front line of all of this, acting as farm employees, grocery store clerks, and delivery truck drivers, and more. And these essential workers, gig workers usually, right, work long hours, don't have any security in their job, aren't able to necessarily do the precautionary measures to keep this virus at bay, right? And are not receiving, undocumented workers are receiving no support from the federal government, which just even puts them more at risk. This is really life or death for people with disabilities. Roughly 1 in 4 adults in the US have a disability, and an estimated 60% of Americans have at least one chronic health condition, which makes the COVID-19 virus even more impactful in some of these communities. So, because even in normal times, there's struggle for healthcare services, for government benefits, and you can imagine what's happening now during all of this when so many things have shut down. And again, COVID-19 pandemic is having a disproportionate impact in the LGBTQ communities. 20% to 45% of homeless youth who identify as LGBTQ are the ones at a huge risk now in terms of being homeless and not having some of the services that they need, some of the contacts to help keep them safer and healthier during all of this. So look at this. Many homeless LGBTQ young adults rely on community centers to really get connected and get some of their cares met. But they're all closed down, right? So there's not a lot of easy access to services that were so important for the well-being of LGBTQ youth, for sure, and young adults. And FBI report that Chinese and Asian Americans are now experiencing increased hate crimes due to the corona global outbreak. So here we go. Fears of the coronavirus have fueled rising anti-Chinese sentiment. There's a lot of racist slurs, just pointing the finger ignorantly at a whole culture. And so the online hatred and distrust has increased live versions of abuse and attacks and violence, and really importantly, boycotts of Asian-owned businesses. I just thought this was interesting that Emily Liu of suggesting to her what is it cousin, like, watch out when you go out, cover your face and don't forget your sunglasses so that you can hide your Asian traits and be safer. What a commentary on our society. So, addressing the gender bias in general for women during COVID-19. Sexism on the COVID-19 front line. PPE is made for 6'3" rugby players. So health professionals, experts, and unions say poorly fitting equipment is risking lives of female workers. So there's all sorts of things that are due because of poorly fitting PPE, right? Having to put these masks that are too big and trying to get them to secure around your face so that you won't get all the cooties. Wearing these all day, just having to do all this kind of amending your PPE so that you can move about in your job. And these are women that are having to use poorly outfitted safety equipment, which obviously puts them at risk. And the simple matter is because they were only designed for men. So impacts on sexual and reproduction health, important stuff. Access. Provision of sexual reproductive health services, including maternal health care and gender-based violence-related services, are central to health rights and well-being of women and girls. So it's like all the stuff's getting shut down. And I'm sure some people are gleeful that some of the stuff is being shut down, but access to these really important resources are not here, and it's creating havoc, right? I mean, exacerbated maternal mortality and morbidity, increased rates of adolescent pregnancies, HIV, and sexually transmitted disease, like horrific stuff. And then the economic impact for women, just focusing on women right now, just because of their gender. We already know this. We learned this in class. Women earn less, save less, hold less secure jobs, and are more likely to be employed in the informal sector, meaning where they don't have job security, right, or benefits necessarily. Women have less access to social protections and are the majority of single parent households. So they can't really, like, something as big as COVID knocks them down a lot harder than it does for men who are employed. And then again, because children are at home, the demands of the household are even more impactful, right? And that falls typically on the shoulder of women. And then if we have single households led by females, the idea of their children being home and they're trying to keep a job, just chaos ensues, right? So a very disturbing topic to talk about is that because we are kind of in lockdown in our homes, we've noted an increase in domestic violence. Ugh. So unfortunately, a lot of women are in these lockdown situations, stay-at-home orders, with the very person that is abusing them. And also because we're in these lockdown conditions, so many services are shuttered, they're closed. There's no access to them. And that was an important part of the domestic violence recovery system, is to have services available for women in these really complicated situations. I just thought this was interesting. I've been grabbing all the stuff from all over the internet and news sources, so I'm reading a lot of it. I apologize for that, but I just had so many pieces of stuff that I wanted to share. So I thought this was interesting. So sexism and gender inequality are alive and well in the US and all around the world, right? The inequities women experience are being talked about in ways that, while quite important, are significantly different. So here's the thing is when we're talking about domestic violence and we're talking about inequity during the coronavirus, what hasn't been addressed, at least in terms of domestic violence, is the inequality of it, the inequality. It's again been kind of objectified and put forth that it's because of women's vulnerability and experience of violence, and that we're all locked down together, that these kinds of things are transpiring. And so we're kind of dramatized the fact that the domestic violent issues are that women are so vulnerable in their homes, and like, what a conundrum. What are we to do about this? But the solution has been expressed as, well, here's what we do. We need to call for a peace at home, in homes, and let's have peace at home so these things don't happen to women, right? That's kind of been the angle for this. Because here is the deal. Women are not just victims in this crisis, right? They're huge players. They're a huge part of everything with the COVID-19 response. Nearly 70% of frontline health and social workers are women. Women also shoulder a disproportionate share of unpaid work, and they are critical actors in the sustainable development of all countries, right? So women, even though the impact of women has been phenomenally awful, we have to remember that we don't want to see women as victims in this whole thing. We want them to be recognized as a really important component of what we're doing right now. So then the deal is that we need to be sure that we're including women in all of the response and recovery decisions, that we're including them. And I really like this. This is the only way to build back better for everyone. We got to be inclusive, right? We got to include everything we talked about in class and everything in this short lecture about being inclusive in our decision making, and really cognizant of the fact of what we are doing with our sexist and racist and everything else isms behavior right now. It's really, I think, a great time to like open up our eyes. So, almost there. COVID-19 illustrates stark inequality in the US. And I just loved this. Enough with calling coronavirus the great equalizer. Yes, it's a virus that can access any human body and wreak havoc, but that's it. There's nothing equal about the impact it's having on marginalized populations in the US. Crazy world right now, right? Crazy. But here's something that I've learned from this class: optimism, really. Sexism, racism, xenophobia, ableism, homophobia, and all the others are created and shaped by cultural values, perceptions, and practices. If the meaning behind these differences have been socially constructed, we can do something about that. That's good news. It really is. That's good news. This particular theoretical approach presents powerful opportunities for furthering a social justice agenda. Krenzi Wong says such a reconstruction process would be monumental. But these are monumental times, right? Crises is an opportunity for growth and positive change. But to make it so often requires reframing the problem and looking at the issues through a different lens. Just as we've been forced to make changes in our lives and institutions in response to COVID-19. Haven't we? Wow, we really have. So if we've done it there, we can decide not only to think differently about one another, but to act differently now. We can do that. We've done this huge shift in how we live in this world right now because of COVID-19. And we can keep going with some of this ability to change and shift and to think differently about one another, and to also act differently about one another. Revolutionary, right? So, is the COVID-19 pandemic going to end sexism, racism, ableism, xenophobia, homophobia, hatred, poverty, privilege, all the whatevers, right? Nah. But will we realize some change when this is all over? Oh, please be over. I say yes. We can do this. Stay mighty. Thank you.